Hi, I'm Todd Grimes, and in this program we're going to take a look at the tools and techniques in Lightwave to take our character geometry and get it set up for animation. The first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and load the character geometry that came along with the content. So let's get our character Owlman here, final model, Owlman active, and let's take a look. So the very first step we're going to make here is starting to model his skeleton, which will be the bones that will enable us to deform the geometry and move the character around. So first area I'm going to focus on is his body in the first layer here. So let's take a look. And we're going to start by using the modeler and use the Skelegons tool to create the skeleton. So let's go ahead into the next available layer and stick the body in the background layer there. And the first tool we're going to take a look at is the Draw Skelegons tool, which will enable us to start clicking and dragging out the bones. So in the Create tab here, let's go ahead and find the button that's called Skelegons. And select that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start in the top view here. And I'm just going to go ahead and click and drag. And release. And I'm just going to start with just that bone. And what I'm going to do, let's go ahead and select the points of the bone here. And I want to make sure that it's right in the center there. So let's go ahead and Control V, let's set value those points right on the x-axis there. Okay. And then let's go to the side view. I'm going to take this bone and I'm going to put it right about the center of the pelvis there. This is going to be the first bone in the chain, this character's center of gravity. Basically, a skelegon is a guide that will be converted into a bone in the layout. We can use all the modeling tools like drag, move, and rotate to move the skelegons around within the character's geometry. So I'm going to go ahead and select the drag tool, Control T. In the side view, just move that point in. You can see I'm just kind of clicking and dragging on the point, and it's editing the skelegon, changing the scale of the bone. And I can also physically move it using the Move tool and place it wherever I want it. Now I started in the top view here because I want to make sure that I have the proper rotational alignment on the bones when I convert them in the layout. So whichever axis we draw the skelegon in will represent the bone's local y-axis. So we started by drawing this skelegon in the top view, which means the y-axis of the bone will be straight up and down. So this will become more visually apparent when we get into the layout and we can see the bone's rotational channels. The next section of the skeleton I'm going to create is the spine. I've got the pelvis and I'm going to work up the spine, the neck, and the head. So this time I'm going to look in the front view here. Let's go ahead and select my Skelegons tool here again. And I'm going to click and drag. And that's the first spine bone. Click one more time, one more, and another one. So the number of bones in the spine is dependent on how you're going to move the character and how much geometry you have in the body. I generally start with 4 and add or subtract as I need to. So I'm just going to create 4 spine bones, and then now I'm going to go ahead and do the neck bones. Let's go ahead and make 1, 2 neck bones, and lastly 1 head bone. I wasn't too concerned with placement just yet because I'm going to edit these skelegons with the drag tool to get their placement just right. Let's go ahead and deactivate the tool there. And let's go ahead and take a look at this bone chain that we just created. What I want to do again is make sure that these are right in the center axis. So I'm going to use the Set Value tool again. And just make sure that it's at 0x. Say OK. And I'll snap all those right on to the center axis. So now what I'm going to go ahead and do is take a look in the side view and sort of edit the bones around, get their placement just right. So let's go ahead and start at the bottom here. And since I made the character mostly on planes, I want the skeleton to be sort of right in the center of the geometry there. The area I'm going to look at is up in the neck and head region. So let's go ahead and start down here. And I'm going to use the drag tool, Control T, and just kind of move some of the points around, even these out a little bit. Let's work our way up here. And let's drag some of these up. Let's take a look at the head and neck. What I want to do is have the head bone have its pivot right there. See, right about the lower section of the ear there. It's right about where the pivot of the skull I want to be. And I'm going to go ahead and take the neck bones here, and let's move them up a little bit. I'm going to go into point mode and select all the skelegons in the spine, just under the neck, and then select the last point here in the pelvis as well. And I'm going to go ahead and set value those to the z-axis. So it's right in the center there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to connect the lower spine to the pelvis. So I'm going to grab this point, then the first point of the pelvis, and Control W. Let's go ahead and weld those together. So now I've got a pelvis connected to the neck. Okay, so now I have a general spine, neck, and head set up. Let's go ahead and name these bones. What I'm going to do is come over to the Detail tab. I'm going to find this skelegon tree. Go ahead and open that. You'll see that right now we have a list of the skelegons we've created so far, and they're just called bone. So what I'm going to do, the first one here we've got is the pelvis bone we created. Let's double click on it, and it brings up the naming box. I'm going to go ahead and call this one pelvis. That's okay. And then I created 4 spine bones. So I'm going to go ahead and double click on the next bone here, bone 01, and I call that spine underscore 01. That'll be the first spine bone here. Then I'm just going to select this text here, spine underscore 0, and just hit Control C. Say OK. And then when I come over here to rename the rest of the spine bones, I just hit Control V and name them accordingly. Spine 2, spine 3, and spine 4. Now what I'm going to do is just keep going. These two are the neck and then the head. So I'm going to double click on that one. Let's call it neck 01. And neck 02. And let's just call this one simply head. Okay, so now I'm going to close this window. And I've got all the bones I have in there now, and they're all named and ready to go. Okay, so now I have the spine, neck, and head ready. I'm going to start building the arm off this last spine bone. Okay. So now I want to continue to draw skelegons, but I want the chain to come right off the spine here. So let's go ahead and select the last spine bone. Let's come back to our skelegons tool. And with this bone selected, when I start to click and drag now, the bone chain will come directly off this last bone. And what I'm going to do is start to draw these bones out in the top view. I'll start with the right hand side here, and I'm just going to click in the top view there. And I'm going to do one more. These two bones represent the collarbone. And I'm going to add one more short bone there, which is the shoulder. I'm doing these all in the top view for now. And then 2 clicks for the upper arm, and 2 clicks for the lower arm as well. Let's start with these bones before we get into the hand. Let's go ahead and select them here in the top view. And again, let's set value them right on the Z. Line them all up there. Now let's take a look in the front view here. We're going to start moving some of these around. So let's grab the last 4 bones, which represent the 2 forearm bones and the 2 bicep bones here. I'm just going to go ahead and move them down a bit, right into the center of the arm. Let's zoom in here. And right in the middle there, I want to be the elbow joint. So I'm going to have that lay right in the center of the geometry there. And drag tool, let's go ahead and move some of these around a little bit. Okay. And now let's get back to the collarbones here. And basically I'm just going to use the drag tool, move the points around so I get the bones positioned just right for deformation purposes. I kind of want to have the joints be where they would be in reality, with some sort of artistic liberty to get the geometry to deform just right. So just kind of moving the collarbone down a bit and continue just the drag tool. Kind of move. This is the shoulder bone here. Going to move that up. And let's take a look again in the top view. Just want to move these back into the arm a little bit more. So let's go ahead and drag them more towards the center for better deformation. So now let's go ahead and open up our skeleton tree window again so we can name these bones we just created. Let's head over to Detail, Skeleton Tree. Again, you can see these are parented off the last spine bone. And let's go ahead and double click on the first one. Let's call it collar, right, 01. And the R signifies the right. We started with the right hand side. Okay, and let's call this one collar 02. And let's call this one shoulder right. And I usually call this one bicep right 01. And call this one bicep right 02. And this one I usually call forearm right 2. Okay. And let's go ahead and close that window. And see what we have so far. Okay, so while we can control the bone's rotational alignments by which axis we draw them in, we can also edit that rotational alignment if we had to draw it in a different axis. Some of the joints we want to be on a pitch channel. For instance, right now we've drawn all the bones in the top view. So right now the pitch is going like this for each local bone. In this particular joint, we want this motion to be on a pitch channel rather than a heading, which is what it currently is. So we're going to take the up value of this bone and point it this way. So now the pitch will be going like this. So for instance, some of the joints we're going to want to be on certain channels. And specifically, the elbow joint here, we're going to want that to rotate on a pitch channel. And right now, since we've been drawing the arm out in the top view, we've kept the bones on a nice plane here, but at the same time the pitch channel is going this way. And we want it to go this way. So what I'm going to do is grab the 2 bones in the joint here, and let's go ahead and turn on symmetry first. Let's grab these 2 bones. And I'm going to go to the Detail tab here and find the Edit Skelegons tools. Go ahead and click that on. And then what you'll see is these little markers here. And they're sometimes referred to as bone up tags. They're basically showing the direction in which the bone's local y-axis will be. And the local y-axis is the axis along which the pitch rotational channel is aligned. So in the event of this joint, we want to take these two little blue tags here, and let's go ahead in the side view, and just click on them and rotate them downward like that. Now this will tell this joint right in here that we want the pitch channel to be going this way rather than this way. So now what we're going to do is work down the wrist and into the hand and create all the bones we need to move the fingers around. We'll use the drag tool to get the points just right where we need them in the geometry. Okay. So again, let's go ahead and select the last bone here. Control A, I'll zoom in a bit here. And again, in the top view here, let's go ahead and grab our Skelegons tool. And I'm just going to click out our little wrist bone here. And I'm going to make this bone rather small. It's going to be just the first bone in the hand to manipulate the wrist around. And from there, I'm going to work out starting with the index finger. So let's go ahead and click one bone out to right about the index knuckle there. Click another one out here. And 3 for the digits of the finger. And let's go ahead and zoom in a bit on what we just made here. Again, looking in the top view, just going to go ahead and use the drag tool and manipulate the points around, sort of putting the geometry, the points of the bones, right where the intersection of the geometry joints will be. Let's go ahead and deselect all the index finger bones we just made here. And leave that wrist bone selected. Now let's drag out the middle finger, right to the knuckle. And select the wrist, and we'll drag out the ring finger. Same process for each finger, 1 in the hand and then 3 for each finger. And lastly, the pinky. Yeah, let's take a look in the top view. Just make sure we have all of our joints right where we want them. Control T for the drag tool and just sort of manipulate some of these points around a bit. Okay. So you'll notice in the side view that all the bones that we've dragged out so far are right on a plane. We drew them all in the top view, and they remain right on a plane there. When we look at the geometry, you can see that there's a little bit of a differentiation there. Now at this point we have two choices. We could either edit the skeleton to fit better in the geometry, or edit the geometry slightly to fit better the skeleton. I usually prefer to edit the geometry a little bit, so that way the bones remain flat on a plane. Okay, so let's go ahead and swap these layers. We'll put the geometry in the foreground and the skeleton in the background. Before we do anything, let's go ahead and make sure we have symmetry on. So whatever edit we make here on the positive side of the X will be mirrored on the opposite side, keeping the character symmetrical. So let's go ahead and select hand geometry here and take a look. I'm just going to go ahead and use the move tool and move it right down. What I want to get is the bones of the hand and the fingers to be going right through the center, roughly, of the finger geometry. And let me just take a look at the relation to the rest of the arm here. Let's move a little bit of the geometry down a little bit more just to compensate. Okay. And let's go back and finish up the hand with the thumb. Let's go ahead and zoom in on this region here. Let's move this in a bit here. Just going to drag some points around to edit the joint here a little bit. Okay. Okay, so let's select the wrist bone again. And I'm going to go ahead and activate our Skelegons tool. And just like the fingers, I'm going to drag out one bone for the hand, for the thumb, and then 3 for the actual digits. So now let's go ahead, and since the thumb is sort of on a natural angle in the geometry, I'm going to take a look at it in the other views here. So let's go ahead and take a look for starters in the side view. And I'm just going to use the move tool. Let's just pull that down a bit. And let's grab the rotate tool. Now here what we want to do is take a look at the thumb in all the views, including the perspective, just so we know to get the joints, the placement of the joints just right. So I'm going to do some editing in the perspective window as well. Let's go ahead and pull the points out here. Okay. And that looks about right. Again, you want it right through roughly the center of the thumb. Okay. Okay, so once we've created all the hand bones, we want to go back into the skeleton tree and go through the process of naming each digit and finger. And when you do, what you should end up with is something that looks like this. The first bone we created in the hand was the wrist, followed by the index, fingers, sections, middle, ring, pinky, and thumb. Now I've gone ahead and named each of the hand bones in each finger set as 0, 0, and then followed by 1, 2, 3 at the finger joints. This naming convention is mostly for animators who a lot of times like to hide some of these hand bones, and then you get a natural 1, 2, 3 in each finger. Okay. So the next section we're going to look at is creating the hip and down the leg and foot. So now we're going to focus back on the pelvis region again. And let's go ahead and take a look down here. And what I want to do is create a hip right in the center there that stems out to the legs. I'll start with the right hand side, just like we did for the arm here. So I'm going to go ahead and grab our Skelegons tool again. And let's start in this view, the front view. So the first bone I want to drag out is a hip bone. And that hip bone is going to come down. Then I want one to stem off like that. Now the next thing I want to do, I'm going to deselect those there. And let's just make sure that that center hip bone's right there in the center of the x-axis again. Okay. And let's also set value them right on the Z, just in case we were off center. Next thing I want to do is create a bone in the top view that's going to extend forward. Now this bone that I just created here, again I'm going to set value it to 0 on the X, just to make sure it's lined up right. And then I'm going to move it into place. And this bone here stems off the leg bone. It's going to come straight out because it's going to be a controller for our knee. And let's place it right about there. And let's look at it in relation to the other bones we've created. It's stretching straight forward. Okay. And let's go ahead and weld the points here to connect them. Okay. So this bone acts more as a controller rather than a deformer. Let's go ahead back and select this side of the hip again. And now we're going to drag out the thigh bone. Let's go ahead and do that again in the front view here. And just drag down. Drag one more. That's the calf bone there. Then let's switch to the top view. Click and drag out foot bone and a toe. And again, just sort of clicked and dragged arbitrarily. I'm going to snap all these into the proper position using the set value tool. Let's go ahead and select the whole leg here. And just to make sure that they're all lined up perfectly, go ahead and set value them to 0 on the X. And just move them back into position. Now they're lined up perfectly there. And let's go ahead and edit them in the side view here. I'm going to go ahead and put a slight bend in the knee there. The foot bone here. Let's go ahead and set value of the foot bone to 0 on the Y, right to the base. And I'm just placing the joint right where I want the foot to sort of bend when he's walking. And the joint for the ankle as well. And let's go ahead and drag out one more bone, which is the heel bone, which I also want to be stemming off this foot bone. So I'm going to select that foot bone. And in the top view again here, just click and drag out heel bone. And go ahead and put it right to the heel. And again, at this point, I'm going to open up the skeleton tree and name the bones just like we did all the others. And once you've named all the bones, it should look something like this. The first one we created is the center hip bone, followed by the right hip bone, and then the little bone we started out at the top of the thigh, our controller, and then the thigh, calf, foot, and then toe and heel off the foot bone. Okay. Now let's just go ahead and double check our placement here. What I want to do is connect again the chains here so we're all linked up. So let's go ahead and grab this point and weld it to that one. Control W. Okay. So just like we've been using all the modeler's modify tools like drag and move and rotate to edit these bones, we're going to use some of the other tools to create the opposite side, the mirror tool. So what I want to do is take everything I've done for the arm and leg and mirror it to the opposite side here. So let's go ahead and select the entire arm chain and the entire leg chain. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and activate the mirror tool, Control V. And let's open up the numeric panel here. We want it right down that center axis there. So X, enter out all the fields as 0, and space. So the next thing I'm going to do is take all of the bones that I just mirrored from the right-hand side over to the left and rename them, switching the R to an L, since now these bones are on the left-hand side of the character. And once you've renamed all the bones, you should have something that looks sort of like this. All the spine bones we created, and all the right-hand side arms, fingers. Let's collapse the right. And same bones on the left-hand side, as well for the legs. Okay, so now what I want to take a look at is the load order of the bones. We want them to come into layout in a certain order so that we can scroll through them with ease. But every point has an order in the modeler, and in the case of skelegons, the point order is the order in which we created them. So let's go ahead and take a look at how we can make this skeleton load properly. What we did is we started up the spine, then created the arm chain, and then the leg chain, and then went down the next leg, and then mirrored these over. What I want to do is change it so that the load order goes up the spine, goes down one arm, and then instead of going from there to the leg, go down the next arm, and then over to the legs. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and let's start with the pelvis bone here. And let's select right up the chain here. Just the spine and the neck and the head. And that's the order that I made those bones in. I'm going to go ahead and hit X for cut. And I'm going to paste them in the next available layer. Now what that does is it just created all those bones in a new layer. So when I go ahead and cut and paste the next set of bones, that will be the order in which these points are given. So I'm going to go ahead and start with the right hand side and make sure symmetry is off. So go ahead and select the right hand side, and I'm going to cut that chain and paste it in here. Okay. So now we're going up to the head and then down the right arm. Now let's come back here, select the left arm, and let's go ahead and cut those out and paste them in there. Let's come back and let's just grab our little hip center bone there, cut that out and paste it in here. And then let's go to the right hand side, cut, paste, and lastly cut, paste the left set of legs. And then just go ahead and hit M for merge points. So any of the points that are right on top of each other that we just copied and pasted onto themselves will get merged. 5 points eliminated. Okay. Now let's go ahead and stick that back in the first available layer. Let's take a look at the character. We've got his general skeleton set up. There's a couple more extras we want to add, which are bones for his eyeballs, as well as one for his belt. Now generally, things like extras, you sort of, especially in the case of this belt, we don't want it to be deformed by the bones in his body, because we want those pouches and things like that to retain a certain degree of rigidity. So we're going to add a special bone just for the belt, and 2 bones for each eyeball. So let's start with the eyeballs. Let's go ahead and, in the characters layer here, let's zoom in, and let's go ahead and select his eyeballs. And hit plus there to hide unselected items. Zoom in here. And then let's go to the next available layer here. Put the eyeballs in the background. And I'm just going to go back to our Skelegon tool. And in the top view, let's just click and drag out a bone here. And set value to the x-axis. Use the move tool. And let's go ahead and put that right in the center of the eyeball there. And we don't have to be terribly exact, but we want it to be right in the center where the eye would pivot from. Okay. And then let's go ahead and mirror that bone. Shift V, and right on the x-axis there. So now we've got 2 eyeballs. And again, of course, as always, we'll open up the Skelegon tree. Name the first one that we made was the right-hand side one, so let's call that eye right. And we'll call the second one eye left. Good. And go ahead and cut those out and paste them in the layer with the rest of our skeleton here. And let's come back to our character, unhide. And this time let's go ahead and hide everything but his belt so you can get an idea of where that is. And the next available layer here, I'm going to make a bone for the belt. And what I'm going to do here is just make just one big bone there. Because I don't really need the belt to deform, I just need to keep its rigidity. So I'll start with this one bone here. Again, set value to the x-axis there. Let's move it right up into the middle of the belt. Okay, and I'm going to go ahead and cut that out and paste it into the layer there. And of course, as always, let's make sure we name it. We'll just call it belt. These types of bones will vary from character to character, whereas the underlying skeleton pretty much will remain the same as long as it's a two-legged, two-armed character. Okay. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this completed skeleton here, and let's just cut it out and paste it right into the layer with the character there. So this geometry has these skelegons. And when we convert them in the layout, it'll deform this geometry here. Okay. So now, the character also has a cape. We're going to use bones to deform that cape. So let's follow the same process and create some bones for the second layer, which contains this cape. I'm going to go ahead back into the next available layer. This time, let's put the cape in the background. This one's going to be pretty easy. We're going to do them all in the top view here. Let's go ahead and skelegons. And I'm going to start right down the center. I'm just going to click and drag out one. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to click and drag out a bone for, let's do a couple in the ridges here. And roughly one for each segment of geometry here. And then, of course, let's set value them. Kind of want it right in the middle of the cape there. This bone is going to be sort of like the anchor bone here. Let's go ahead and just drag it down a bit. Just using the drag tool, moving some of the points around. And once again, like always, we open up the skelegon tree and make sure that we name all the skelegons we just created. And once you've named them all, it should look something like this. I've called this first set cape center, and just numerically write down the list, the 12 bones. So let's go ahead and close that window, and now we're going to make a couple other chains, a couple other segments here. Let's go ahead and select all of these bones, and let's copy them and paste them in the next available layer. Let's put our cape in the background there. And starting with the right-hand side, just move these over. In the top view here, let's go ahead and rotate them a little bit. Okay. Okay. And then let's go back here to our skelegon first set again. And I'm going to do the same thing. This time I'm going to copy the whole chain here. And let's paste it in the next available layer. And this time let's kind of move it over, rotate it around here. And I'm just going to sort of move the bones around a little bit to where I want the cape to ultimately be deforming. So I'm going to have a couple extra up front here where his shoulders will be. I'm just going to take a look in the side view as well. Let's pull this down a bit here. So then again, what we want to do, of course, is open up the Skelegon tree and rename all the bones we just created. We copied them from the original set we made, so we just want to take out the word center from the name and switch it with R for right. And you might find this process to get tedious after a while, but the beauty of Skelegons is that once we have a biped skeleton, humanoid, 2 arms, 2 legs, and we have the Skelegons all named properly, we can reuse that tree in other characters and not have to do the naming over again. So once you've gone through and named them all, go ahead and just replace the center with R. And I'm going to mirror these and perform the same operation on the other side. Replace the R's with L's. Mirror. Okay, so now we have all the bones in the cape, and we've mirrored the right side over to the left. Let's go ahead and take a look. In the Skelegon tree, show something that looks sort of like this. Cape center, and then the rights and lefts. Okay. And now, just like the other geometry, we want to take this bone chain for the cape, cut it out, and paste it right in the layer with the cape there. So now we've got an entire Skelegon tree for the character as well as one for the cape. And that completes the modeling process for the skeleton. Okay, so now that we've created the skeleton for the character, we're going to take a look at vertex maps, specifically weight maps that we're going to apply to the points in the geometry to sort of zero in the influence of each bone. So the first thing I'm going to do is take a look at the character's body. So let's go ahead and select his suit here, and I'll go ahead and hit plus to hide the unselected items. Okay. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'll go ahead and turn symmetry on for this part. I'm going to start with the torso. And what I want to do is create a vertex map on the torso that I'll assign to the points of the spine. So let's go ahead and select torso section right there, and make sure that you don't have any of the geometry of the arm selected. Just come around to the shoulder. And let's get a little of these as well. Get a little overlap here. What I'm going to do is take a look in the lower right of the interface here. And there's 3 different types of vertex maps: weight, texture, and morph. And what we're going to be looking at is weight here. So let's go ahead and look at the perspective view. And let's go to the display options. What I want to do is take this viewport here, which is the top right, and I'm going to go ahead and put that on weight shade. Now I can see the geometry as well as the geometry I've selected in weight shade mode. Sort of a greenish color with white lines to represent the wireframe. The greenish color represents a neutral in terms of the weights. So right now there's no weight maps on this character, so he's all green. And what I'm going to do is come back down to the lower right here, and right in the drop down there, let's select New. And I'm going to go ahead and just call this one Body. And just go ahead and leave the initial value at 100%. And you can see there we've got now an orange color on the geometry that we selected. That represents 100% influence of that particular weight map. Okay. So let's go ahead and deselect that geometry. And then let's take a look at the arms here. I'm going to divide the arm into two separate weight maps, one for the upper arm and one for the lower arm. So I'm going to go ahead with symmetry on. I'm going to select some of this geometry under here. And I do it right to the halfway point of the arm there. And it's going to deselect a couple of those there. In this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a look at, let's go ahead and just select that whole section going into the torso there. I'm going to come back down here, create another new weight map. Let's call this arms 01, the first half of the arms here. Say OK. Now in looking at what I have here now, it's the orangish color on the geometry I've selected. I want a little bit more of a tapering going on into the body here. So let's take a look closer. You can see it's sort of governed by the geometry I selected. So let's go ahead and let's hit underscore, shift underscore, and turn off the influence of the map we just created. And let's come to map here and find the weights button here. Let's go ahead and turn that on and bring up the numeric requester, letter N here. And let's do a little adjustment to create the influence of this weight map. I'm going to go ahead and change the fall off here. Let's put that on linear. And right now there's 0% influence. So I'm going to create a little bit of a gradient that goes from 0 to 100%. So I'm going to put this change factor at 100%, which will basically put the end of the gradient at 100% and the beginning at 0. Okay. So now let's go ahead and look right here in the side view and use the right mouse button. Let's click and drag out a little bit. And you can see this cone it created here. And that represents the area of the gradient of the weight map we're going to create here. So go ahead and hit apply, and you'll see what happened there. So now the weight map sort of tapers off a little bit more into the body. And we can do further adjustments to these weight maps once we start doing our deformation tests. And let's go ahead and select the lower portion of the arm here. And let's call this one arms 02. Okay. Okay, so now what I want to do is focus on the legs. And in turn, what I want to do is turn off symmetry, because I want to have one map on one side of the legs and the other on the other. Generally, when I built the character on the plane like this, the legs are a little bit close in proximity in terms of the geometry. So the influence of the bones is going to pull a little bit on the other side as well. In the case of the arms, the geometry is far enough away to where the same influence map we just created can be on one side of the arm as well as on the other. And these bones won't affect this side. In the case of the legs, they're too close together, so we're going to need to split up those maps. So let's go ahead and select geometry on the right-hand side of the leg here. And again, make sure symmetry is off. And let's grab some of the pelvis here again. Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and make a map. And I'm going to call it leg right. And I just leave it like that for now, and then when we do the deformation tests, see if there needs to be any editing in the hip region. And then let's go ahead and select the same geometry on the left-hand side. What I'll do is I'll just hit minus and hide that geometry we just made. It's a good way to see where you might have missed some geometry as well. Grab that little piece there. Let's apply the map to that as well. and hide it. And now it's a little bit easier to go ahead and select the left side. Okay. And let's call this one leg left. Okay. And next what we want to do is focus on the neck and head region, including the eyes. So let's zoom in a little bit on his head section here. Now, let's turn symmetry back on for now. What I'm going to do is select his head there. And let's go ahead and hit plus to hide the unselected stuff. There's two maps I want to create in here, one for his neck and one for his skull region, which includes his jaw. So I'm going to go ahead and select all the geometry right on his neck there, right up to underneath his ear. Not there. And I'm going to go ahead and call that neck. Okay? And then I'll just go ahead and hit minus, hide that. Now let's go ahead and call this head. Okay. Now let's unhide, and there's one thing we want to look at here. All the extras that we've added, such as the eyebrows, the hair, and the teeth, need to have this map applied to them as well. Let's go ahead and select the eyebrows and the hair. And zoom in here a little bit, grab those teeth. Okay. And let's, again, create a weight map here. Select head. There we go. Okay. And let's take a look at the eyeballs. Let's go ahead and grab those eyes and turn symmetry off. And let's select the right one. Call this eye right. And let's select the left one. Make a map, we'll call it eye left. There we go. Okay. And lastly, let's go ahead back to the suit here. Let's put a little of that neck weight map on the collar of the suit. Let's go ahead and put symmetry on there for good measure. I'm just going to select that collar piece and get that bit of that neck map on there. There we go. And let's put a little bit on the back, the geometry on the back of the hair as well. Just grab this piece here. Okay. So now let's focus on his wrists and hands. Go ahead and zoom in on his hand here, and make sure symmetry's on. So we're going to again apply the same map to both sides here. Now, let's grab this geometry back here, and let's give that the map that we created for the forearm section. Let's go ahead and that was arms 02 there. And then let's take the rest of the geometry, which is the hands, and create a new one called hands. Okay. So now let's just go back to focusing on the belt that we made a special bone for. Let's hide everything but the belt here. Now let's just make a weight map, just one for the whole thing, and we'll just call it belt. Okay. And lastly, let's head over to the cape here. Now all the bones in the cape are only going to affect the cape and not the body, because these will be two separate objects in the layout. But just to have a nice clean setup for consistency's sake, let's create a weight map for the cape as well. Of course, just call it cape. Okay, so now we have the character's entire skeleton and all the weight maps on the geometry. We're ready to bring the character into the layout and convert these skelegons into bones and start doing some deformation tests. So let's go ahead and switch over to layout here. And what I'm going to be doing is some deformation tests as well as working with the hub. And one way to be sure that the hub is active is to just look for this modeler button in the upper corner there. If you've opened up other instances of layout, they'll no longer be attached to the modeler through the hub. Okay, so let's go ahead and load that character here. And Owlman is our character. Okay. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just take a look at the character here. And for the sake of visibility, I'm just going to move the light and the camera around. I'm going to go ahead and put auto key on and adjust the light here. Let's go ahead and rotate that around. Okay. And let's go to the camera view here. And let's move the camera. In case we want to make any render tests of the deformation, of the geometry's deformation when we start testing the skeleton here. Okay. And back to perspective view here. Okay. So the first thing we want to look at is the object properties of the geometry. So let's go into objects here and start with his body. Select that. And let's bring up the item properties panel. So what we're going to look at is right down here the subdivision order. And this model is a subdivisional surface model. It's made with subpatches. So right now what we're seeing is the subdivided version of it. Now we can change the display level to make this interface work a little bit faster. We can go all the way down to 0. You can see what it does to the geometry here. Let's go ahead and put this in wireframe mode. And that's basically the cage. We can go up to 1, which shows a tripled version. I usually stick around 2 when I have a scene with just one character in it. Let's go back in our shaded mode here. And next thing we're going to look at is the subdivision order. And this is basically Lightwave determining at what point it should subdivide the geometry. In this case, we're going to be deforming this character with bones as well as displacement maps and things like that. So we're going to take the subdivision order and change it from first. Let's just put it on last. Because what we want to do is have the bones generally deform the mesh and then have the mesh subdivided. Okay. And let's go ahead and do the same thing for the cape. So let's go ahead and select the cape now. And again, let's go last. And let's change that to 2 display level. Okay, so let's return to the body object here. So what I'm going to do is come over to the Add drop-down, and let's scroll down to Bones, and select Convert Skelegons into Bones. Okay, and it tells me how many bones were created, 82 in this case. Okay. So now all the skelegons that we put in the model in the modeler are now bones within Lightwave, ready to deform the mesh. Okay. So let's come back into the drop-down up here, and let's go into Bone X-ray mode. And this enables us to see the bones through the OpenGL geometry. Okay. So now the first thing I want to take a look at are the bone's properties. I just selected any bone in the skeleton and hit P to open up the Properties panel. Now for each object, you get a fall-off type for the skeleton. And it's defaulted to inverse distance greater than 16. What I want to do is zero in the influence of each bone a little. So I want to take its influence and shrink it slightly. So I'm going to take the fall-off type. Let's go up to greater than 64 for now. So every bone in the skeleton has its influence shrunk slightly. And just looking at the general properties, the bones are all active when I converted them, and they're all rested. So they're ready to start deforming the geometry. So if we look, let's grab the thigh bone. And I'm going to go ahead and select the rotate option. And I'm just going to kind of rotate it. You see what's happening here. Because of the proximity, that these bones are pulling a little bit on the influence of the geometry on the other side here. So what we want to look at is the way to take these bones and tell them to use the weight maps we created in the modeler. There's two different ways of doing this. We can do it here in the layout using the spreadsheet, or we can go back into the modeler and actually apply those weight maps to the skeleton. So let's take a look at both methods. I'm going to go ahead and reset that rotation there. And I'm going to come back into the modeler here for just a second. And let's come to the first layer here, our character. And let's go ahead and open up that skeleton tree again. Okay, and you'll notice within the skeleton tree, it's all the bones we created with their names in the section right to the right of weight map. Now what I can do is start applying the weight maps to all the skeletons here by double-clicking on the weight map region. I'll start with the pelvis. Where it says weight map name, I can either type it in or select it from a drop-down. All the maps that we created earlier, you'll see in this list. So in this case, let's go with body. Let's say OK. And you'll notice now the pelvis is assigned to body weight map. Now again, this is one of two ways you can do this. I prefer to go ahead and do this process for every bone within the skeleton tree. And that way, as long as I keep the weight map naming convention the same for each character, I can always just drop this skeleton into a new character and never have to go through the process of assigning all the weight maps again. But let's also take a look at how to do it in the layout here. What I'm going to do is, now that I've converted the skeletons, let's go ahead and open up the spreadsheet. And what we have here is all the elements within the scene. And these are all the bones right here. And if we go over to the drop-down on the right, scroll down to Bone Properties Influence. Then you can see one of the bars is weight map. Okay. Now, the pelvis bone that we just added to the body weight map within the modeler, you can do that here as well. Just click the drop down and select body. Another great thing about the spreadsheet editor is I can select multiple bones by shift clicking. For instance, I'll select all the spine bones here and go to the drop down and select body. So the spreadsheet makes it really easy to select multiple bones and assign them one weight map. But again, if you do it in the skeleton tree in the modeler to the skeleton that you've created, you'll never have to go through this process again, as long as you keep the naming convention for your weight maps the same per character. Okay, so let's head back over the modeler there. And let's take a look at the first layer, our character here, and open up the skeleton tree again. And you'll notice in the skeleton tree, all the bones we created as well as the weight maps that are assigned to those bones. I've gone through and assigned each bone a weight map that we created in the character. So basically what I wanted to do is come right down the spine here and give all the spine bones, including the pelvis, the body weight map. And then of course the two neck bones get the neck weight map. And some of them are more obvious than others. Head gets the head weight map. Then when I come into the arm section, I wanted to give all the bones up to the joint, which is right at the forearm there, arms 01, the map that we created for the shoulder and the upper arm. And then the two forearm bones get the arms 02. And then from the wrist right on down all through the fingers and thumb, I'll get that hands weight map. And all the same process on the left-hand side for the arms and hands. And when we come down to the hip section, I gave the hip center and these two left and right hip bones the body weight map. And then all the leg bones get their appropriate. All the right legs get all the leg R's, and all the left legs get the leg L's. And then lastly, our extras here. Eye right, eye left, and the belt gets the belt. So you might find that process tedious to assign each of those skelegons the weight maps. But once you've done it once, again, you can take the skeleton and copy it into another character, and as long as the character's weight maps have the same naming conventions, you won't have to assign the weight maps to the bones anymore. So now we've done that, let's go ahead and save the model here. And let's come back into layout. And I'm going to go ahead and close the spreadsheet here. And what I'm going to do is come over to clear. And let's just go ahead and say clear all bones. And yes. So now those skelegons, those converted skelegons are gone. And let's convert skelegons again. Let's go over to add, bones, convert skelegons into bones. And again, 82 bones were created. And now let's just check. Let's grab any bone in the skeleton here and hit P. And I can see that it's been assigned the bone weight map body. If I scroll through to any other bones, let's grab the thigh, leg right, leg left. So now all those weight maps are already assigned. And I don't have to do it in the spreadsheet editor or by hand here. So, okay. Now let's just check that load order. Let's grab the first bone in the chain, the pelvis. And I'm just going to use the down arrow to scroll through the bone chain. I want it to go right up the neck, into the head, down the right arm, and then right down the left arm. And then down the right leg and down the left leg. Looks good. And then the two eyes, of course. Okay. So the next thing we're going to look at is the parenting of the bones. I want the bones to be parented in a certain way. We can't parent the certain bones that we want in the skelegons because a skelegon will only be parented if it's end to end, and not all the bones we want to be end to end. So what we're going to do is take a look at the scene editor and start parenting some of these bones. So let's go ahead and open up the scene editor here and take a look at what we've got in the scene here. And we've got our character and all of his bones. So you'll notice that not all of them are parented to one another, and there's breaks. And those breaks are from the little bones that we created that aren't end to end with one another. So let's go ahead and hit O on the keyboard to bring up the general options panel here. So what I want to do is make sure this is on, parent in place. Because each of these bones, if we select one, has a numeric value in space in terms of its rotation as well as its translation. So if we go ahead and start parenting these bones, they're going to move in their positioning to accommodate. But with parent in place on, they'll stay where they are and just make the numeric compensations. Okay. So in the scene editor here, I'm just going to start clicking and dragging to parent. The first thing I want to do is parent the spine bone to the pelvis bone. So I'm going to select the spine, and I'm just going to left click and drag right up under the pelvis there. And that parented it. And then let's come down to the hips here. And let's parent the thigh bone to our little thigh controller bone here. And again, since they're not end to end, they don't come in naturally parented. Let's do the same thing for the left here. Okay. And then let's take the two eyes. Let's hold down Shift and select both of those. And let's click and drag on up. And let's parent them to the head. And last but not least, we've got our belt. And it's going to go ahead and parent that to the first bone in the spine. Okay. Okay. So the next thing we want to look at is setting up the rig so that it's easy for the animators to use. And what I'm going to do is change some of the colors of some of the bones as well as some of the geometry so that we can see it better in different viewports. So a typical method for assigning colors to bones in the rig is to label everything on the right side red and everything on the left side green. So let's go ahead and do that. You're going to grab the first collarbone here, collar right, and scroll down to the thumb here. Hold down Shift and select all of those bones within the right arm and hand. And right up here at the Colors tab, let's just say Color Selected Items as red. Okay. And let's do the same thing for the left side. This time, we're going to select all the left side bones. And this time we're going to go ahead and say Color Selected Items green. Again, you can use other colors if you'd like. It's just they're good complementary colors that don't that stand out from one another. And let's go ahead and do the same thing for the legs here. All the right's red, and all the left's green. And lastly, left and right eye here. Let's go ahead and make the right red and the left green. I usually find the dark blue default color here to be good for the rest of the bones because it's nice and dark in the OpenGL and you can usually see it through whatever colors you have. Now you may run into situations like this where some colors aren't as easy to see. For instance, in this case, the red through this geometry. But most often, these different colors work out fine. Just go ahead and fix one here. So the next thing I want to do is take a look at each of these bones and their rotational alignment. So let's go ahead and select Rotate over here. And let's scroll through the bones here. Let's grab any of them. Let's go up the spine. Now if you look at any of the bones that are sort of rotated in space, and you can see down here in the rotational panel that they've got an inherent value that came in when it converted the bones from skelegons. And what I want to do is set up each of these bones so that that value in their rest position is actually 0 numerically. So what I want to do is the record pivot rotation for each of these bones. So now take a look down here again. There's a numeric value set in there. And when I do the record pivot rotation, you'll see those values return to 0, but the bone doesn't move in space. So now that position that that bone's in is actually rotated 0. Okay. And what I want to do is go through and do that for each of the bones within the skeleton. So what I'm going to do is let's go back up to the pelvis here, the first bone in the skeleton. And let's come over to the layout drop down. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that function of record pivot rotation and assign it a hotkey on the keyboard. So let's come over to interface and say edit keyboard shortcuts here. Okay. And now let's just do a search for record pivot. Okay. And it found it for us. And let's go ahead and stick it on one of these keys here. Any key you like. I put on E. Select E and just hit assign. So now on the keyboard, E will record pivot rotation. Select done. And I'm just going to use the down arrow. I'm going to hit E and then down arrow through each one. You see the first bone in the spine. It sort of comes in with its pitch oriented 90. And you can see that the bank and the heading channels are lined up there. Once we record pivot rotation, that becomes fixed. So again, let's just go ahead and down arrow through each one and hit E. through the whole skeleton here. Okay, so we've got all the bones in the body activated and ready to go. Now let's just convert the bones in the cape and get that set. So we're just going to follow the same process here. Let's just select the cape object. And again, let's do the add bones and convert skelegons into bones. 58. And for the sake of visibility, let's go ahead and assign some colors to these bones. Let's go into the scene editor here. And in our cape, grab the right side here. And just to differentiate it a little from the body bones, we'll make it dark red rather than plain red for the right-hand side. And I'll go ahead and make the left-hand side dark green. And for the center ones, let's go ahead and make those black. And now what I want to do is just make sure that the cape follows the actor. So let's close this for a second here and take a look. Right now, if I move the spine a bit, you can see he's leaving his cape behind. Just go ahead and set up the parenting for that. Let's go back into the scene editor here. And basically what I want to do is parent the cape to the last spine bone. Okay. So let's grab the cape, and I'm going to go ahead and put it right up under spine 04. And just for the scene editor here, let's go ahead and change the color of the actual cape object. We'll make it dark blue like the cape itself. And let's change the color of the actor's object as well. Let's make that this brown color. Sort of matches his suit a little bit. So when we pop open the scene editor, we'll have a little bit more visibility in terms of what objects and bones we're looking at. So now let's take a look. Grab this spine bone here. There we go. Okay. So now we're going to take a look at some deformation tests and start seeing how the geometry is relating to the skeleton. So the first thing we're going to look at is the most common problem areas, being the shoulder and the hips. So let's start with the shoulder here. Let's go ahead and grab that shoulder bone there. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and rotate it and see what starts happening. Okay. Now you'll notice the deformation isn't too bad. We're getting a little bit more movement under the armpit than we want there. So we're going to just do a little bit of the adjusting to that particular weight map. Just denting in a little bit too much there. So let's go ahead into the modeler. And we've got the hub active here. And let's put the viewport here into weight shade mode again. And the specific area we're going to look at is right up under the arms here. And again, let's make sure symmetry's on. And let's take a look at the map called Arms 01. You can see the problem area is right around this point here. The first thing I'm going to try is I'm going to select this point. Let's go ahead and untab. Select that point right there. And I'm going to do a underscore, shift underscore, and remove the influence of the arm map from just that point. And let's hit tab again. And let's see what difference that makes and see what editing we need to do from there. And we'll let layout refresh here. You can see that pretty much helped. Now we might want a little less influence right in here. So let's go back into the modeler here. So the area I'm going to look at is this intersection right here. I want to slightly take off some of the influence of this arm weight map on that particular point. So let's go ahead and grab the airbrush tool here. And I'm going to go ahead and open up the numeric requester for the airbrush tool. And let's put the cursor right over that intersection and click and drag a little. And you can see I'm slowly adding more influence to that point. Now in this case, I'm going to hit undo there. I want to take away a little of the influence. So rather than paint on more, I'm going to use it a little bit more like an eraser. Let's go ahead and set the weight value to 0. And effectively now I'll be reducing that point's value. So I'm just going to do that a little bit there. Maybe a tiny bit right in here. And remember, when you're dealing with the weight maps, we're only really affecting the vertices in the cage. So while the object gets deformed and there is a lot more geometry in between here, it was only really looking at these vertices in terms of deformation. So let's save that. Let's head back into layout and let it refresh here. There we go. Okay. So that's working out pretty well. Okay, so let's go ahead and reset those rotations. And now let's take a look down here at the hip section. Now we don't want too sharp of a crease. Let me grab the thigh here. Right at the hip. Let's go ahead and give it a little rotate there. Now what we're getting looks okay, but a little bit of bizarreness in there. A lot of times what I like to do in this situation is let the bone's influence get a little bit shared by deactivating some of the bones in the hips there. Let's go up one and select this thigh controller and open up the item properties for that bone. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to turn it off and then scrub a frame to see it update here. We're getting a little bit better deformation in there, but what I want to do now is just revisit the weight map a little. Because what I want to do is lower this crease just a bit. So let's go ahead back into the modeler here. And let's zoom out a bit here, and we're going to focus on the legs here. Okay. Now what I want to do is take a little bit of influence off these points here. So let's go ahead and select that row of points. Okay. So what I'm going to do is, since we're starting with the left leg here, I'll just deselect the points on the right side here. And let's go ahead down here into the lower right and say new again. But we're going to stick with this leg left, but we'll change the initial value from 100% to, let's say, 35% for starters. And say OK. And now if you look, you can see that these points still are assigned that weight map, but a little less influence there. And let's do the same thing to the right side. Just grab all these points here. And let's say new. And we'll select the right leg map here. And we'll say 35 for these as well. And let's see how it looks in the layout here. Since we have the hub active, we just wait a moment for it to refresh. And it looks a little bit better. And depending on what type of geometry you have right in there, a lot of wrinkles or things like that, you can adjust the weight maps accordingly. There's just a few different ways you can edit the maps, and using the hub, see there how they update. Okay. So now let's take a look at a couple of joint regions, the knees and the elbows. Let's reset that. Okay. So I'm going to sort of turn the model a little bit this way. And let's go ahead and bend the knee. Now I see what we get. Semi-decent joint there. Let's go ahead and take the calf bone here. And let's check out the item properties. And one of the things I want to look at is the joint compensation. So let's go ahead and throw on joint compensation for parent. And you see it sort of sharpened up the deformation there a little bit. Just turn it off. And you can see what happens when we use joint compensation for the bone itself. But in this case, we sort of want it to be more edged off this way. So joint comp for parent is going to work better for us. And let's add some muscle flexing just to get a little bit of shape change. Now if you just turn it on, you can see what the deformation looks like. I'm going to turn it on and change the value from 100 to, let's maybe move that down to say like 30 or so, just so we get a little bit of shape change. And let's actually increase, let's say, the joint comp for the parent. Maybe that can go a little stronger. Let's move that up to 120, just to square off that knee a little bit better. Okay. So it's joint comp for parent 120 and muscle flexing at 30. Let's go ahead and add those same values to the other knee here. There we go. And I'm going to go ahead and reset those rotations. So. And let's take a look at the elbow joint here. Let's bend the elbow. You can see the joint's working pretty well there. We want a little bit of sharpening here as well, and maybe a little bit of deformation shape change right there at the wrinkle. So let's go ahead and take a look at this bone's item properties. And let's add a little joint compensation for the parent. And again, let's maybe crank that up a little bit more, get a little bit more sharpening. And you can play around with these settings, take a look and see how they deform the geometry and decide which one you want to go with. Maybe a little muscle flexing for parent here. And again, they don't always deform the geometry to the exact shape you want. I'm going to go ahead and use this muscle flexing, but again, I'm going to turn it down quite a bit. So we get a little bit of shape change. Okay. And this is one of the reasons that we like the joints to be on the pitch channel, because if you'll notice, these functions here, the joint compensation and muscle flexing, don't work on either the heading or the bank channels. So if you want to see the results of these tools, you need to have your joint bending on a pitch. Okay. So let's go ahead and reset that. And let's head down to the fingers. Now what we want to do, let's go ahead and bend a finger here. And we'll bend that joint pretty well. And take a look at your own finger. You can kind of see that usually the joint gets a little fatty and sharp right in there, but not so much right at the knuckle base here. And we don't really want a sharp crease at this joint, but on these two we kind of want to have a bit more of a sharpened crease there. So what I'm going to do then is create a little bit of more of that sharp sort of joint that you get in your finger there. So I'm going to go ahead and put joint compensation for the bone itself as well as for parent. So you can sharpen it up right here and as well as underneath here. And let's do the same thing for this bone here. And then we get a little bit more of that sharpness there. And on this one, let's try a little bit of muscle flexing for parent. And let's experiment with some of the values there. And we just want to make it sort of finger-like in the joint region. Okay, So once I have the joint comp and muscle flexing settings just right, I go ahead and apply those same values to each of the last 2 digits of the rest of the fingers. Okay, so let's reset these values here. And the last thing I want to look at is the head. Let's just make sure everything's functioning properly in here. And let's start with his lower neck and his upper neck, and then his skull here. And it looks like everything's sort of in working order here. So I'll just go ahead and reset those values. Okay, so now we have the deformation and the joints looking pretty good the way we like them. You might find through the course of animating the character that to get certain poses you might still have to do further tweaking. But through the course of animation you can continue to adjust the rig and the maps. Okay, so now we have the character's skeleton in place and deforming the mesh the way we like it. The next thing we're going to do is set up some inverse kinematics on the legs to get the character's movement just right. So we're going to start by creating some nulls. So let's go over to the Add button here and scroll over to Add Null. And I'm going to name the null here. I'm going to use the character's initials, OM, for Owlman here. And let's call it heel_R. Oops. I usually like to make these all capital so they stand out a bit from the other objects. And let's go ahead and open up the scene editor here. And collapse those bones there. Let's take the object we just created here, and let's go ahead and make it red. And I'm going to go ahead and clone it to create the nulls I need for the foot setup. So say clone current item, and I'll type in 5 there. because I want a total of 6 nulls for the setup. Okay. So now I'm going to go ahead and rename some of these. Let's grab the first one here, and let's rename current item, and let's call this one pivot. And each one of these nulls has a specific function in the IK setup. Let's rename the next one. Let's call this one tiptoe. And then the next one we'll call simply toe. And let's call this one ball, as in the ball joint of the foot. And let's name the last one ankle. Okay. So next thing we want to look at is the position of the nulls and their placement. Basically we want them to be lined up right along with the bones here in the foot. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the parenting function to place them where I want and then set them up in the proper order. So let's go ahead and bring up the general options panel again here. And this time let's take parent in place and turn it off. Okay. And let's uncollapse the skeleton here. Okay. Now let's grab the heel and shift click to select all of the nulls except the ankle. Let's go ahead and click and drag these right up under the toe. So you see all those nulls moved right there to that intersection where the toe is. They're all parented to the toe bone right at the moment. Okay. And we're going to grab this ankle null, and let's go ahead and parent that to the foot. So now with parent in place off, the nulls inherited the bone's position as well as the rotation, which when we go to set up the IK, you'll see the importance of the ankle rotation there. Okay. So now let's bring back up the display options here, and let's turn parent in place back on again. Because now what we're going to do is keep the nulls in these relative positions but reparent them to one another. Okay. So let's go ahead and bring up the motion options here for these nulls. Let's hit M on the keyboard. And let's click Unparent. And just use the arrow key to scroll up and unparent each of these nulls. And you'll see the nulls are no longer parented to the bones, but they've retained their position. And let's just edit those slightly. Let's head over to the side view here. Here, we'll go to the right view here. And let's select the heel bone, heel null, excuse me, and move it right to the back of the heel there. Okay. And then let's take the pivot null and let's move it right about the midway point between the ball joint and the end of the foot there. Okay. And then let's grab the tip toe, place it right at the end of the foot there, right at the toe. And lastly, let's just move the toe here right in between those two nulls. Okay. So now what we're going to do is parent them in the order we created them to set up the proper parenting structure for the IK. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent the pivot to the heel, the tip toe to the pivot, the toe to the tip toe, and the ball to the tip toe as well, and the ankle to the ball. And what this will enable us to do is to get the proper functionality out of the IK from these nulls. So let's go ahead and let's start with the right leg here. We'll set up the IK. Let's go ahead and start with this bone, the right hip. I'm going to bring the motion options panel up one more time. And this is where we assign all the different IK functions for the bones. So the first thing I'm going to do with this one is turn on the unaffected by IK of descendants. This will make a nice clean setup IK chain starting here and ending at the ankle. Now let's go down the list. Let's start with our controller here. And this bone, what we want to do is come over to controllers and limits. And what I'm going to do here is take some of these channel modifiers and change them from keyframes to inverse kinematics so that this bone's channels will be controlled by IK. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the bank controller to IK as well as the pitch controller. Okay. And then I'm going to scroll down to the thigh bone here and do the same thing for the thigh bone. But this time what we want to be controlled by IK is the pitch and the heading. So let's go ahead and take the heading, put it on inverse kinematics, as well as the pitch. Okay. And then let's scroll down the calf bone here. This one we only want the pitch to be controlled by IK. Because basically we don't want the bone to be able to rotate like that or like that. Nor do we really want it to swivel at the knee joint. Pretty much just goes one way. And what I'm going to do for this bone is I'm going to put a little bit of a limitation on the pitch channel so that the knee can't hyperextend. Since there's a slight kink in the bend in the bone here, I'm going to just put the minimum at, let's say, -20. So we can get a slight bit of bend forward out of it, but it won't go any further, which would in turn look like the character's legs were breaking. And I'll just leave the max at 180. That's fine for our purposes here. Okay. And let's grab the foot bone here. I'm going to come over to the IK and modifiers tab for this one. And I need to assign it the IK goal, which in this case is that ankle null. So let's go ahead and select the ankle null for that. And what I'm going to do is turn on unaffected by IK of descendants for this one as well. The next bone in the chain is going to have a match goal to the toe. So this just makes a nice clean cutoff for the setup. And then I'm going to turn on full-time IK. and match goal orientation. So basically, however that ankle rotates, the bone will follow. And let's take the goal strength, put that at 100. Goal strength is relative to the scale of the character, and generally anywhere between 50 and 100 works well for a standard size human type character. Okay. So then let's go to the next bone, the toe here. And with this one, we just want the toe to have its orientation driven by that toe null. So we're going to go ahead and select goal object toe. We're going to leave everything off except for match goal. And now let's take a look at what some of these nulls do. The first thing that'll be the most obvious is that the foot will remain planted on the ground. I'm going to go ahead and select the pelvis here, and I'm just going to move it downward. You can see the left leg sort of pokes right through, whereas the right leg stays on the ground there, because we've set up the IK chain. Let's take a look at the nulls here. We'll start with the heel. Now this is the general placement null for the foot. You can use it to rotate the foot or move. That's basically where you want to place the foot. You can use the heel. Now the next one in the list, let's scroll down to the tiptoe. We'll come back to the pivot. The tiptoe is just that. It'll put the toe up on its tiptoe. So if you want the character to leap to its tiptoes there, or do something like a ballerina type move, you can rotate the foot from the tiptoe with that null. And let's take a look at the toe. Again, the toe is just taking the toe bone and having it match goal to that null. So if you have sort of a cartoony situation, you want the character to flap his foot around and things like that. Basically, that toe bone will rotate however the toe null does, which helps us out with the ball rotation, because basically I can rotate the ball joint, but the toe bone will stay in line with the toe null, so I can make the character's foot roll. And that brings us back to the pivot. The pivot is generally what a lot of people call the cigarette butt null, and it pretty much can simulate the motion of, say, stomping out a cigarette butt. And you usually use it in conjunction with a little bit of ball rotation there. So you can kind of swivel. The character's up on his toe, he can quickly swivel, or if he wants to put out a cigarette, kind of nudge that out. Now, for the sake of visualization and ease of the use, usually what I do is hide some of the nulls that are more rarely used. I'm going to start off by coming back to the heel here. I'm just going to go through the list of nulls and turn certain things off and hide some. The first one being the heel, again, is basically where you place the foot and rotate it however you want. I want to keep all the rotational channels active for the heel null, as well as all the motion channels here down in the lower left. But for the pivot null, generally I want to turn off all of the movement for that null, because the only null you ever really want to translate is the heel. The rest of them just rotate. Okay. But in addition, the pivot null, generally the only rotation used on the pivot is the heading. So I usually turn off the pitch and the bank to make it more clear as to what it does. And again, the tiptoe, same thing. Generally, you pretty much only use the pitch, although occasionally you might bank, put the toe up, and occasionally you might get a little bit of ankle bend there. So usually I'll just deactivate the heading on the tiptoe. But again, like the pivot null, I turn off all the movement channels. Okay. And the toe, same thing. Let's go ahead and turn off all the movement channels. And this null, pretty much, you only want to rotate it on the pitch. You may always find that there might be some reason in some cases to rotate these nulls on other channels, but you could see what happens, like say if I rotate it on the heading, Generally, the foot wouldn't really do that unless it was, you know, breaking or under serious duress. So usually what I do is I turn off the heading and bank there and just leave on the pitch. And same goes for the ball null. Generally, just leave on the pitch and again turn off all the movement channels. The ankle null is generally, that's the IK goal, and you pretty much don't really want to rotate or move that one much. I usually turn off all the channels for this one. And in addition, I usually hide this null as well in the scene editor here. And also lock it. So basically when I'm scrolling through the list here, it'll skip right over the ankle null as I down arrow through it. And then a lot of times what I'll do is also hide the pivot null. Mostly because it's more rarely used, and this just kind of keeps it out of the way. I know it's there if I need it, but this way I can sort of see the other nulls easier. And I usually do that for the toe as well. Again, it's not quite as commonly used, so it makes the setup a little bit more clean and easy to read. So now what we want to do is take this IK setup we did just now and perform the same operation on the left side of the body. So let's go ahead and start with the nulls here. Just grab that heel null, and what I want to do is I want to clone the heel null as well as all of its children. So let's go over to the Scene tab here, and under the Generics drop-down, let's scroll down to Clone Hierarchy. And what that'll do is it'll clone the null we had selected as well as all of its children. Now in this case, basically, we have two sets now of this grouping. So let's come back to the second one we created here. And let's go to the movement. The move, I had an option for this one. Because what I want to do is I want this null to be on the same side, same position, but on the opposite side here. So I'm just going to take the X value, and I'll put a negative in front of the numeric there. And that moved it to the exact same position on the opposite side, which should line it up right with the other side of the foot. And I'm also going to come back in the scene editor, shift select all of them, and again, because these are on the left, let's go ahead and change them from red to green. And what I'm going to do is rename each one of these and change that R to an L. And now we have all the necessary nulls that we'll need to create the IK chain on the left side. And we're pretty much going to go through the same process on the left side of the leg with all the left hand bones that we did on the right. So let's take a look at that. Again, we'll start with this bone here, and we'll run through it one more time. So we want unaffected by IK on this bone. And you can see this blue line here represents the IK chain. Now if I take this bone here and turn off the unaffected by IK, you can see that the chain now goes right down to the pivot point for the object, because the chain has no stopping point essentially, which could sometimes alter and affect the movement in the other IK chain here. So you always want to have a stopping point for that chain. Let's grab the next one here. And again, this one we want bank and pitch on IK. And then the thigh was pitch and heading. And the calf got pitch. And what we had done on the calf bone was to, again, set a pitch limitation so that the knee wouldn't bend too far. And then get the foot bone here, which we assigned to the ankle goal. So let's come over to IK and modifiers and select goal object, ankle. And again, we turned all of these on. Put a value of 100 in there. And the last one was the toe here. And what we did there was select the toe as the goal object and turn on the match goal orientation. So now we should have working IK on both sides here. Okay. And let's just grab the pelvis here, do a test. Okay. And let's just go ahead and lock the ankle null here again. Okay. So the next thing we're going to take a look at is a similar process. We're going to add some IK to the arms of the character as well. Again, generally the process for adding IK to the arms is a bit simpler. For the most part, we only really need one null per chain. So I'm going to come over here and say add null. And I'm going to call this one arm goal right. Okay. And what I'm going to do again is I want to position that right at the wrist bone there. So I'm going to turn parent in place off again here in the display options panel. And then let's go ahead and parent that to the wrist bone in the right hand there. So we can also do that in the motion options panel for this item. Right there where it says parent item. In addition to being able to do it in the scene editor, you can do it right here as well. You see now it's right in the position of the wrist null there. Okay. So let's go ahead, turn parent in place back on. And then let's go ahead and unparent it. We're essentially just giving it its position without having to manually line it up. Okay. So now let's go ahead and start with the collarbone. And generally, I am the IK chain here. Let's go ahead and take the collarbone and turn on unaffected by IK of descendants. Okay. And the shoulder, I'm going to go into controller and limits here. And I'm going to put on heading as inverse kinematics and pitch. So it can rotate this way or this way from the IK. And with this one I'm going to do the same thing, but I'm going to put on heading and pitch as well. Now this bone, you don't really want it to bend right in the middle of that upper arm there. Most of the time this bone is just reserved for doing some banking like that. And generally you don't really want that affected by the IK. So I'm going to skip over this bone, just leave all of its channels on keyframes and it'll be ignored by the chain there. Now this bone we want to have the pitch channel on IK. So again I'm going to come into pitch controllers and put on inverse kinematics. And I don't really want it to bend this way or this way because the joint doesn't bend that way. And again, let's put some pitch limits on it. And this time, let's put the max at 0. And this way, it can't bend backwards, essentially. See that grayed out area in the channel represents the area where it cannot go. And this bone, again, is mostly just used for a bank to move the hand and wrist. So generally, you don't really want it to bend here in that way. So I'm going to go ahead and just, again, leave all that on keyframes so it'll be essentially ignored by the IK chain. And lastly, let's take the wrist bone and grab that goal object, the arm goal. And what I'm going to do is put on full-time IK as well as match goal. And again, let's put that strength at 100. And let's test it out here. Let's go into objects and we will select that arm goal. And let's see. And we're getting a little weirdness there. Now let's take a look at the side view here. Again, we're getting a little bit of weirdness right in here. So I think what I want to do is put some pitch limitations on this bone, on this null here. So let's go ahead and select that bone and bring up the motion options panel again here. And let's put on pitch limitations. And let's start with something like -30 and 30 there. And again, you can see in the channel, wherever the area that's grayed out is the motion which it won't be able to go by. And that kind of did it. Occasionally you'll get some of that going on, but it's all dependent on how you have the goals, where your goal placement. Generally, IK can be a little bit predictable, but there's certain things you can do to adjust it. For instance, here in this situation, let's go ahead and rotate this. Now we've got match goal orientation on the wrist, so I can move the null to move the hand around. But if I want to, say, point the elbow in a different direction, I can grab one of these bones here, and I can use the bank channel, which I did not assign as inverse kinematics, and rotate it a little. Let's grab this one instead. And that way I can sort of point the elbow, so to speak. And this way, if you have the character, if you want the character to lean on a table or be up against a wall, sort of imagine that he's kind of leaning on something there. You can see that it works to keep the hand stable, while the rest of the body can sort of move around. So if you have a scene that requires the character to either lean on something or pick something up or walk on his hands, that sort of stuff, the IK on the arms will help you do that. You pretty much always need it on the legs, as the character usually will be on the ground and need to be walking and things like that. And again, you can use some of the channels that aren't used by the IK to do certain things like pointing the elbow. And in the leg chain, let's say we want the character to squat here. We can use our IK null, our IK bone rather, little bone that we made shoot off the hip there. We can use that, rotate it on its heading channel, and you can do that point the knee effect. So if you have the character bending down or side to side, and you want to just change the direction that his knee's pointing in, and you can put him in all sorts of interesting poses. Okay. And the next thing we would do would be to just recreate that same null and perform the same operation for the left side that we did on the right here. And again, typically I would, in the scene editor, make the right arm go red and the left one green. So the same process on the left, which is add a null. And let's make it green. Go through the process here. Parent it to the left wrist this time. That gives it its position there. And let's just go down the chain, unaffected by IK of descendants here. And we put the pitch and heading on this one, on IK. And on the shoulder, we limited its pitch quite a bit to -30 and 30. And same for the arm bone here, is IK. And again, this one we really don't want it to bend much, and we really only use it to bank. And by that motion, we want to keep that on sort of a keyframe. We want to keep that to keyframe ability. So we're just going to leave those all on keyframes. Here we want pitch. And again, we're going to put that max at 0 so that the elbow can't bend backwards. And there might always be cases where you actually want it to, in which case you just have to make the proper adjustments. Again, this bone, we'll leave everything on keyframe. And the wrist here, arm goal. It's the goal object, unaffected by, oh, we don't need that on. Full-time IK and match goal orientation. Now, and there we go. Okay. So generally, most animators prefer to use forward kinematics when animating the arms. It's easier to get the right pose and the more fluid motion. But occasionally on a shot-per-shot basis, you may have a scene that requires the character to either lean on a table or push off something that requires the wrist to be rigid, in which case you would have to use the arm IK. Let's go back here. And now we're ready to set up the final nulls for finishing off the rig. Okay, so the last step we need to do is add a few more nulls for selecting and placement of the character. So the first null we want to create is one that will enable us to quickly and easily pick the pelvis bone. Now, depending on the character, sometimes it's not quite as easy to grab that bone, but being as this is the center of gravity, it's often the first place you want to start. So generally what I like to do is create a null and use a tool called proxy pick, which enables me to create a flag that is easily selectable, which will in turn select that bone. So let's go over and add another null here. And I'm going to call this OM pelvis pick. Okay. And what I'm going to do is, again, parent and place off, because I want to position this null. And I'm just going to parent it to the pelvis. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it out a bit to right about there. So where it's sort of floating out in front of the character, and it's really easy to grab and click on for selecting. And generally I make this null orange just to set a standard for the characters. Okay. And now let's go to the object properties for this null. And what I'm going to do is, under geometry here, going to select under add custom object, item shape. And let's go ahead and double click on that. And generally I make this a ball. And let's change the scale to about 20 centimeters. So you can see, now if I click on anywhere in this ball, I'll select that item. Now you can also make it any shape you'd like, box, pyramid, diamond. I usually find the ball to be sort of the less distracting and more aesthetically pleasing sort of setup item there. Now if you make it a box, anything other than a ball, like I say a box, you can perform this filled operation, which just makes it look like a solid piece. And again, that's helpful in some situations to make the items more visible, but in this case, find it least distracting to just make it a ball there. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is go to my Master Plugins panel. So let's head over to the Scene tab. And Master Plugins here. You'll see Spreadsheet is currently active, so we opened it earlier. What I'm going to get out of this drop-down is something called Proxy Pick. Double-click on Proxy Pick here. And the proxy object is the item that I just made. That's the item you're going to want to select in order to select something else. So Proxy Object, select that pelvis pick null. And for the target item, we're going to select the pelvis bone. So just go to the drop-down, and right there, pelvis. We'll click on Apply Label so we can see the little word in there. Now let's go ahead and close the panel. Okay, let's go and let's select one of these bones, and just to test it out, put the mouse right over the ball here, and looks like it worked. Right. Okay. So now we have a tool that makes it real easy to select that pelvis bone. Whenever we have other items selected, if we're looking to get the center of gravity of the character, that pelvis bone, we can just click right on that ball right there, and we'll automatically get the pelvis bone selected. Little flag sticking out makes it easier to select the item. Okay. So what we're going to do next is just create the last two nulls, the handle nulls for the character here. So let's go ahead and say items, let's add another null, and this one I'll call OM master. And I'm going to go ahead and leave that right at 0. Let's open the scene editor here. And usually I like to make this null purple. And again, you can make it any color you like. It's just a standard that I've set for a lot of the characters here. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to parent the character's body as well as all the IK goals to the master null. So now this null is the very top of the chain. If I create a key for this null and its descendants, it'll create a key for everything within the rig. And it makes it easy to create keys on a pose by pose basis for the entire rig, one pose at a time. And lastly, what I want to do is make one last null, just like that one. This one I'm going to call it handle. And the general purpose of this null is to use to place the character along with its animation into various places within the scene. Let's go ahead and open the scene editor again. And this one I usually make black. I'm just going to go ahead and parent that master to the handle. So when I'm creating the poses, I can create a key for the master and all of its descendants and work the character pose by pose in its animation. And then once I have a set in place, a full res set, I can load the character as well as its animation and use this null as sort of a handle to just bring the entire animation as well as the character and place it wherever I'd like in the scene. And let's just go ahead and save the scene. And you want to save pretty frequently throughout this process. Pretty much after each step, just make sure you save the scene. Okay, so now let's take our rig and put the character into a pose to give him some attitude and some life. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is get him into a general stance. So let's grab his master null here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a keyframe. And I'm going to say frame 1 and say current item and descendants. And that'll essentially make a keyframe for everything in the entire rig. And frame 1 will be the frame in which we can pose them. Okay, so let's go to frame 1 here. We like to keep frame 0 at this default pose in case you need to do any editing to the rig in the future. So let's go to pose frame 1 here. I'm going to put auto key on so it makes it a little bit more like working an armature. put the elements into place when you're posing the character. Okay? So generally what I'm going to start out with is the pelvis, the center of gravity. And let's just put him into a sort of a heroic pose here. I'm going to grab the pelvis here. And let's go in the side view and kind of pull him forward a bit. And let's go down just a bit. So he's right on the ground there. Okay. And we'll come back down a little bit more probably when we move the legs out. Let's grab the heel nulls. Start with the right heel. And let's just widen his stance a bit. Move it out. And rotate it a bit. And let's do the same thing for the left foot here. Let's move it out. So rotate it a little bit here. Let's maybe move this one slightly forward. And let's grab the pelvis bone again here. And let's give him a slight bit of bank in the hips. And let's rotate him out a little bit here. Okay. So next thing we're going to do is work on the upper body here. So let's just go ahead, give the pelvis a little bit of bank rotation that way. So let's give the upper torso a little bit of opposite direction here. And let's go to the side view. And let's just kind of give him that real arched back, chest forward kind of feel. And I'm going to go right up the neck there and tilt the head down a bit. Okay. And then what I want to do is focus on positioning the arms. And generally, for a pose like this, I like to use the regular keyframing of the arms. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the IK for the arms here. So let's go ahead and grab each wrist. And I'm just going to shut that off for now. And generally, I usually animate with that off, unless the scene requires it on. Okay. And I might have to just do some adjusting to these rotational limitations as well, or maybe not. Go ahead and throw his shoulders back a little bit here. Yeah, let's check the side view here. It could probably come back a little bit more even. Yeah, let's throw the shoulders back a little bit. And just trying to give him a little bit of attitude here. Sort of that strong, big-chested hero kind of stance. And let's take a look at his hands here. Let's go ahead and zoom in a bit. And another thing I could do is hold down Shift and multi-select some of these bones. And I can do things like grab that pitch handle and rotate them all at once. So what I'm going to do is kind of bend them right up and then sort of edit this one a little bit here. Sort of give them a fist here. And you're just going to fix that spread a little bit there. Again, let's do some multi-selecting and curling up here. And with the bone X-ray, I could sort of see what's going on through the geometry. Give me an idea of what I'm doing here. And let's see, let's bend that back a little. Okay. let's move his thumb here. Yeah, we'll do a similar thing over here on the other side. This is also a good way to test the rig. Any further testing that you might want to do, make sure it works. Sometimes it's usually a good idea to put the character in a series of poses that might fit the character's attitude. It's also a good scene file to save the character in a series of poses, so you could use it as almost a scene file model sheet for the character's attitudes. How the character would appear and what shapes in different emotions and attitudes. And generally, this guy is kind of a superhero kind of guy, so we're giving him this kind of really I'm a strong guy pose with, you know, clenched fist kind of deal. And let's do his thumb here. Okay. Yeah, let's move the camera a little bit. We'll play this to the camera here. Okay, so we want to render it out. Okay. And let's grab his eyeballs there. Okay, now let's focus on his cape here. We want to have sort of a flowy look to it. So let's hold down Shift. Let's grab this bone, this one, this one. Okay. And for starters, we'll use these top bones here. And let's go ahead and pitch them downward. A little bit there. And we'll edit these a little bit here. Okay. And just going to kind of give the cape a little bit of overlapping there. Bend that there. Let's come right down and then counter it out here. Okay. Now let's go into regular mode there. And there we go. Sort of a heroic sort of pose here, like he's ready to fight evildoers. And he's a little bit too far forward, maybe. Let's just bring him back a tiny bit. There we go. Okay, so there it is. We had our character, we added his skeleton and his rig, now he's ready to animate. You'll see that the process of rigging can sometimes be tedious, but a lot of the steps are reusable as well. And the more you do the operation, the faster and easier it'll come to you. So until next time, I'm Todd Grimes, and thanks for joining me.